Hi everyone, this is Ben Aguion, the head of education sales at Neverware, and Drew Darnborough.
Hi, I'm Neverware's director of marketing.
Today we'll be taking you through Lee County Schools experience going Google at scale, and we're lucky enough to have Dwayne and Jerry on the line, who I'll introduce in a little bit. So just throughout this presentation, feel free to tweet at us and at Lee County Schools, at Neverware and at Lee Schools. Feel free to ask questions. We'll take questions at the end of the webinar, and to ask questions on Twitter, ask questions here, what have you. Recording will also be present at the end, so feel free to distribute it to other people who you know want to listen and get the valuable goodies that Dwayne and Jerry are going to share with us.
Yep, we'll be sending out an email probably a day or so after the session with a link to the recording and to the slides for everybody.
And just our agenda for the webinar. We'll tell you a little bit about our company, introduce Dwayne and Jerry, have them talk about their path transitioning to Google, how they went about doing it and what exactly they did, some lessons learned, some tips, and then obviously questions so that you guys can voice what you're still wondering and obviously leave us some follow-on items if need be.
Yep, so if you guys can just funnel any questions that you have through the GoToWebinar interface, we'll get to you at the end. Okay.
So a little bit about Neverware. We were recently backed by Google, both as an investor and as a partner, helping to spread the ecosystem and turn old PCs and Macs into Chrome devices. So we've been helping school districts all over the country and have had the privilege of working with Lee County Schools of late and their 90,000 students and computers. We were founded about 7 years ago, headquartered in New York City, with a recent office opening in London, and we've got about 500,000 unique cloud-ready installs globally as of today. So as mentioned, our flagship product is Cloud Ready. It's an operating system that turns PCs and Macs into Chrome devices. It speeds them up, decreases the boot time, and makes them better, more usable devices that you can manage in the Google Admin Console right alongside Chromebooks. And now we get to the meat of things. We've got Dwayne and Jerry on the line. Dwayne, Jerry, if you guys can introduce yourself, that'd be awesome.
Okay, Dwayne Alton. I'm the Executive Director for Infrastructure Services in our Information Systems Division. So think of me as the person that has span of control over network infrastructure, most support, technical support areas, telecom, and even security and surveillance now. So I have a pretty broad range.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jerry Christmas. I'm a system engineer in the Infrastructure Services Division for the County School District. My primary role is pretty much knee-deep in the trenches with the operation aspects of deployment and operability of the running products or devices, as it were, for our infrastructure.
And so to give you some context, Jerry lives in a multi-platform world for us. So he manages client systems from Windows to Chrome OS, and then Cloud Ready also managed through the Cloud Ready console and the Google console. So he gets to see all sides of the operation with our client devices.
Mm-hmm. And just for a little bit of context, I know you guys aren't going to plug yourselves, but I'll go ahead and do it for you. The school district of Lee County was one of the first school districts in Florida to really implement G Suite and Chromebooks at scale. And this is in a state that, in the context of Google's kind of sweep into K through 12 education, has been one of the states that has adopted a little bit more slowly. And so Dwayne and Jerry have really been, standout leaders and a standout district in that regard, really leading the charge within the state. So. So just to kind of dive right into it and talk about how you started going to Google right at the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about what your technology and IT environment looked like before you started this transition?
Yeah. So when we started, we went from years ago being a mostly single platform district. So we were standardized on Windows, and we also, then a few years ago, the consumerization of IT was kind of leaking in, and we had a lot of demand for iPads. So what ended up happening is we were, mostly and officially a Windows shop, but we had a few thousand iPads in our organization. And at the time, we were a shared computing environment. We were not a one-to-one environment. So during the transition to Chromebooks is when we went to one-to-one at our secondary schools. And it's sort of interesting that it was the introduction of the iPads and kind of Apple that pushed us into the Googleverse, if you will. It's kind of an ironic story, but we originally started looking at Google because of we needed a cross-platform Office suite. So we started looking at G Suite well before we started looking at Chromebooks. So that the beginning of the transition started, I want to say about 4 years ago in earnest. So we went through a pilot year, and then we started our phased-in implementation over 3 years in the transition to Chromebooks.
Mm-hmm. And when you say shared computing, can you describe what you mean by that environment? What did that look like?
Well, so the environment varied by school. So what we did is we provided each school received a specified number of computers based upon the number of students. So we had a student to computer ratio we maintained, and really that we started pushing that student to computer ratio to a much higher density when the state of Florida introduced electronic state testing, right? So the majority of that environment, if you were in a secondary school, looked like a lot of mobile labs, because that's where we were focusing a lot of our efforts when we went to digital testing. So on average high school would have the classroom setup, which is mostly teacher technology at the time. They had their laptops and smart boards and audio enhancement, and then they shared mobile computer labs. And a high school could have anywhere up to 25 mobile labs. It was a pretty big implementation, and one that the schools universally hated. Additionally, at our elementary schools, we had a little bit of a different model, and that was that we provided them the computers on a ratio, and then the school would decide did they want more PCs in the back of the classrooms for when they were essentially doing centers, or did they want to have more labs, and the school dictated how that was implemented within their school. So it was really designed around having an equitable student-to-computer ratio, but the schools actually had a lot of influence into how that implementation looked.
And so you had
Windows machines at the time.
Mm-hmm. And so you had the principals who were kind of, it sounds like, making decisions here about the different environments that they wanted, and even at the classroom level. Is that right?
Well, the principals decided where the computers, how they were distributed within the school. So we decided what types of computers. For example, we established the contracts and the standards and all that stuff, and then they were provided a certain number, and they would decide how they were distributed. And then, of course, as we started looking at doing a one-to-one, we kind of turned the whole thing on its head.
Mm-hmm. And from a support standpoint, what did that look like before you turned it on its head? Was that a lot of running around? What did it look like, from a time perspective?
Yeah, support and management too, I would say.
Yeah.
So at the time, support was a challenge as our footprint increased. And we were using a combination of Microsoft tools and Altiris, which is now owned by Symantec, I believe, as our management suite. But it was Windows management. We were requiring them to reimage their machines annually to clean off whatever droppings were there from the previous year. software deployment was, Windows-ish. You run you do the deployment jobs, and it takes a while to get there. And at the time, what you struggled with back in the day is, of course, management was a lot easier over a wire than wireless, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you had wires, you could wake the machines on LAN, run your jobs and put them back to sleep. Wireless changed a lot for us because we went to all these mobile labs. And so if you're at a school, you universally hated these things because software deployment, Windows updates, everything, was kind of a heavy lift. And the model we have in our schools is that we have at elementary and middle school, you have one tech person in the schools. And the high schools will have one or two. I believe we even have one that has three. And then we have 6 technicians that they're assigned in pairs geographically. We have 3 zones. And they go out and handle the break fix on the hardware and things like that. So we were taxing our support structure at that point just because of the large number of mobile labs we were putting into the schools. So I wouldn't know of any of the school techs or any of our technicians that thought that things were very fun back then. And the idea of scaling to a one-to-one eventually, at the time we were focused on Windows. There was a lot of discussion around iPads, but iPad management was a challenge and costing and things like that. But we were focused on Windows, and we thought, if we had to scale this to a one-to-one, how are we going to manage this? And so that was weighing heavily on us. And at the time, the state of Florida did not allow their software was not supported on anything other than Windows or Mac. So, that was kind of the paradigm we were working with at the time, is that we were going to have to be a Windows or Mac shop if we scaled to a one-to-one, and we were going to have to support that environment. I don't think anyone was looking forward to that scenario. In fact, with the size of the staff, I think that most people felt that we were going to have some serious service issues in that world.
Mm-hmm. So you had kind of this shared computing environment, having iPad challenges, maybe a team that was being stretched a little bit thin with the six techs for all break fixes across how many schools?
We have about 97 traditional schools. We have some, that doesn't include charters, but we also have some non-traditional schools like at the Lee County Jail and stuff like that. But so if you think it about 100 school districts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So a lot of schools, geographically dispersed.
Yes, we are actually a pretty spread out county, and if you're from a district that's not in Florida, thinking of 100 schools and 97,000 students seems kind of ridiculous, probably in most states. But in Florida, we're divided up into counties, and Lee County is one of your larger counties geographically. So you're windshield time, all that comes into play when you have the support processes. We're probably the 3rd most spread out district in Florida, and Florida districts are generally more spread out than others. Mm-hmm.
And so it sounded like you were touching a lot of machines, or your techs were touching a lot of machines, so probably an exorbitant amount of windshield time.
Oh yeah, we did.
Got it. And so you're re-imaging annually. Software deployment was taking a while. What was the thing that kind of broke the camel's back? Was it the need for more testing computers, and that as you scaled that up, you were finding it unsustainable, or what kind of led you guys to start thinking we have to rethink this?
Okay, well, so it's interesting. In the state of Florida, I used to get invited to speak all over the country, and people would say, we'd like you to come here and talk to us because we see the state of Florida is so far ahead of others in implementing, technology in the classroom, when that wasn't entirely true. The state of Florida was only really further ahead in legislating use of technology in schools. So, we went into testing online earlier than most, and we, like most of your trailblazers, we had quite a few issues. But the next looming requirement was the transition from textbooks to digital content, and that was legislated. So we had, and then how our instructional materials money could be used was going to change. So we knew, that we were heading into where we needed to be able to deliver our instructional content digitally. So that's kind of what pushed us, and we were struggling with this because we thought there's no way we could afford to do it. We can't scale the operation, can't scale the staff. But something changed, and that was that the state of Florida started supporting additional platforms for state testing. So that opened the door for us to look beyond Windows and Mac OS. That and the combination of my assistant director nipping at my heels like a chihuahua, you got to look at Chromebooks, you know. And at the time, you know, I completely wrote it off because I did not think the state would approve them. Once they did, we went back and we took another look, and so we liked what we saw, and we knew that going into a one-to-one, your biggest headache is going to be support, right? Procurement is easy, but all the things that go around managing and supporting the devices. So we at that point we said, all right, we need to implement a pilot because A, if we go to Chromebooks, we think this is financially doable. And B, if they're as easy to manage as, you know, it appears on the surface, then, hey, we're in the right place now, and we really think we can make the one-to-one work. So that's kind of what tipped us in going in that direction. And our experience with Google, because of the simplicity, you know, the one thing we'll say about the Google management interface is it's not sexy by any stretch, but, you know, it's simple and reliable, and to manage machines at scale, we were super impressed with really, we did not have to scale any of our resources or efforts to scale the implementation side. And that was what initially impressed us and said, all right, this is a real possibility. Then you get into the other characteristics of Chrome OS, right? You know, what are the other headaches that you have? Well, let's look at imaging. We don't have that anymore, okay? If we want to refresh the machines, they could do it with, you know, 3 keys, but we don't even have to worry about that. If we want to get the machines ready for the next school year, we just go in and tell in the management console and say wipe the profiles, and then when they get it the next school year, they open it up, let it update, and we're ready to go. That was a horrific process with Windows, and that went away. Then we started looking, you know, security. All right, none of our users have elevated privileges on our Windows computers, yet we would still get malware. And the thought of sending these things outside of our walls, you know, really made us nervous. So it's another area where the Google ecosystem really shines. You know, we don't have to deal with malware issues. We don't really have to deal with a lot of tech support at the client level, because almost everything that occurs at the client level, if we have an issue, just reset the device. So it's, you know, once we started looking at that, you know, we were starting to check those things off of our boxes, our pain points. And so that's really what kind of, you know, this is, you know, where we went from this being sort of just an exploratory thing to where we could actually see this scaling. So I don't, hopefully that answers your question. I know it's a long way to get there, but, you know, we were trying to attack pain points in a large implementation.
Mm-hmm. So it does answer the question. And so it sounds like you had a lot of different forces, including, I like the assistant superintendent nipping at your heels like a chihuahua, which I think we all know the pressure of a boss getting on us. And then that pushed you guys to start piloting, looking more deeply at what are the benefits of a platform like this, or what does it actually help us solve? And it sounds like, I'm curious to know, how much time do you think you guys saved with reimaging and with not having to deal with malware and effort?
It feels like a million years. In all honesty, the last time, so a year ago, I spoke at the Chief Financial Officers Conference for Florida. And, you know, I tried to put it in numbers, you know, and we figured that our total cost of ownership, if you looked at, you know, everything from acquisition to support to disposition, I mean, the entire end-to-end lifespan, that we were reducing our TCO by about 70% on average. And, you know, the biggest part of that is staff time, right? And, you know, when we look at it, it's not a direct staff savings because we didn't get rid of those staff, but those staff were now able to deal with higher level things like supporting the use of technology in instruction rather than running around doing break fix all day long. Mm-hmm. So, you know, that process, when we kicked off that pilot, you know, the pilot was fantastic, but it was a small number of machines. We had, I think, 9 pilots going on, and each one of those teachers had to, provide some, come in and commit to some training, and we would provide each one of them a mobile lab of Chromebooks to use with their classes as they worked through some training. And at that point, we just didn't have support issues, and so we're thinking, this is really great, but is it a fluke? Because it actually worked out that way. And then when we got to the process of how this all evolved, we did the pilot for the better part of a year, about 10 months. And we started experimenting on our teachers. So we would say, all right, one of the challenges we have with digital content is, let's say that we get all of that content in there, into our environment. How do I distribute that? Okay, so the obvious, discussion at that point is, what are we going to do about an LMS? How are we going to deliver that? At the time, we couldn't talk about it, but what Google had in beta was Google Classroom. And our previous experience was with a full-fledged LMS. And we knew that we did not have, when it was optional, we did not have a huge adoption of our previous LMS because it had a learning curve, And so Classroom came out and they're like, this is dead simple. And it's not as full-featured, but everyone can use it. So what we wanted to do is see, can everyone use it? And what we did is we provided it to the teachers, and we said they had to use Google Classroom to distribute and collect their assignments. And their only training they were going to receive was a 90-second video. And so that's what we did. And then we waited a month, and then we collected feedback on that. And all of them got up and running with that 90-second video. So at that point, we were confident that the tools were very intuitive. And while we were going to have the need to provide PD, we wanted to spend less time providing PD on the actual tools and more on the integration and our new instructional model, what that would look like. So we wanted tools that were mostly frictionless. And then, of course, introducing, at the time, Google Apps for Education as a replacement for Microsoft Office actually went very well. Once we started with the collaboration pieces, they loved it. And so that really allowed us to bring this to our instructional folks and say, all right, we're, not that we always recommend building your entire plan around a platform, but we think we have a feasible solution here. Are you guys prepared to move forward with the digital instruction? And that brought in the implementation schedule. So we had a 1-year pilot, and then we phased in our one-to-one over 2 years. We did middle school first, then high school. And then we still have a shared computing environment in elementary, but we transitioned them from Windows to Chrome as well, understanding we were going to have an existing footprint, and that's where Cloud Ready came in, right? We weren't going to just get rid of all the machines that were out there in the elementary schools. In fact, we moved some of the machines from middle and high down to elementary schools when we did the one-to-one. So they had all these Windows laptops out there, and so we, figured the easiest way to attack that was bringing Cloud Ready. And so over a 3-year period, we had phased in our one-to-one at secondary and our transition from Windows to primarily a Google environment at the elementary. And so if you think 3 years, about, our students in our traditional schools, about 82,000 and about 6,000 instructional staff over 3 years, it went pretty well. Now, of course, with that, we brought in a ton of PD, and we brought in a company that worked with us, and we prepared our teachers. When we knew we were going to implement, the teachers went to 6 to 8 months of training, or 6 to 9 months of training. The first group had 6. After that, we started them earlier. They had 9 months of training before the year before they implemented at their school. And then those people that went to training, it was typically 4 tech leaders. Those 4 tech leaders then became the trainers for the school. Mm-hmm. We worked with our training partner with Innovative Designs for Education, and implemented their LATIC model for instruction. So we integrated our new dense technology environment along with the digital materials through a standardized system for the teachers and a standardized delivery mechanism for the students, which turned out to be Google Classroom. We, at the same time, brought all this in under a single sign-on solution from our friends at ClassLink. So the combination of those tools kind of really brought it all together. And and then we phase the training in so that each year they have certain expectations to meet as far as the teacher in the classroom. We didn't go in and say everybody's going to be an expert the first day. You're going to do everything digitally. The teachers actually choose their mix of content, even though they're choosing very heavily on the digital side. And we say, look, first year you're not going to be an expert, so here's what we need you to be able to do in that first year, and here's what we need you to be able to do in that second year. So because we had teachers that wanted to adopt at different rates, and that methodology hooked the majority of the teachers because they didn't feel the pressure. So when we combine that with the simplicity of the environment, we ramped up actually very, very quickly.
Yeah, and just to understand the timeline in full, so it sounds like you had these 9 pilot sites to pilot the one-to-one, and that was over the first year, and then the following 2 years you phased in for the remainder of the district?
For the remainder of the one-to-one. So the first year was a pilot, second year was middle school one-to-one, third year was high school one-to-one, fourth year was the elementary conversion from Windows to Chrome in a shared environment.
Got it.
And I'll tell you, for districts that haven't looked at these things, when the combination of the Chrome devices, whether they were a Chromebook or whether they were a cloud-ready machine, along with ClassLink's single sign-on solution, helped us tackle one of our biggest pain points at elementary school, and that's a simple way for our youngest students to log in. So when we did this, some of the schools wanted to hold on to their Windows machines in elementary until they saw we let the young students sign in with a QR code. So each of the students in pre-K through 2 can have a code that a QR code they just hold up in front of the camera, and it logs them in. And so we weren't able to get there with our Windows machines, and so what we saw is the elementary schools that were kind of dragging their feet on converting to Chrome all of a sudden wanted cloud ready for all of their Windows machines as soon as they saw that this solved one of their biggest pain points. Because we went from a Windows environment where they were using a shared account at those very young grades to now where everybody's using an individual account, and that's how we tackled it.
And is it a badged SSO? Is it uses a badge, or how does it work?
You can print them out as a badge. And what we did is we essentially generated the QR codes, and then we combined them with their current ID. So the way ClassLink allowed us to do it was we can print their badges off, or we can just grab the value. And we already had ID cards that people used for cafeteria and media center. And since the value was going to be different, we wanted to have a single card with the multiple barcodes on it. And so we combined that into a single card for them. But out of the box, ClassLink does the badges where you just print them in the classroom. And we experimented with different models and different grade levels, and we settled at the pre-K through 2 for using that option. And of course, they have other options if you're outside the state of Florida, but because in Florida we're not allowed to use biometrics, we could not use the facial login, but that's also an option if you're outside of Florida.
Got it. And as far as the timeline, at what stage did you start training up the in-house trainers? That 6 to 9 month process, was that after the first year pilot? Was it partway through the 2 to 3 year phase in at the high school through elementary, or where did that fit in?
It actually was. It's prior to their implementation year. So the middle school the middle school trainers started the spring before they implemented in their schools. So they had the spring and the summer. Now, the reason it was so short for them is because we had our decision timeline. It took a while before we got the superintendent on board with one-to-one. So once he was there, we pulled the trigger and moved as quickly as we could. We learned that it was easier if we had a slower pace for the training. So the next year, those high schools sent their people starting at almost the beginning of the year prior to implementation. So as we're implementing in middle school, we're training the high schools. And the good part was we learned a lot from the training in middle schools, and we've evolved that training each year to be a little bit more effective and to also, help them better spread that implementation within their school. Because I think that we started out with a focus on, how all this stuff works and how it fits together conceptually. Because it was a lot of change. It wasn't really around the Google tools as much as it was around the new instructional model and how all these tools fit in. And I think that, the high school implementation, which was our second year, those teachers had at least 9 months to train, and that went exceptionally well.
Mm-hmm. And so did they then administer standardized training for teachers and other instructional folks in a formalized schedule, or was it more just that they became the in-house experts that could arrange different activities at different schools?
They did both. So we did, we hit a lot during preschool time. So our teachers come back at most schools a week before school starts, and at our Title I schools, they come back a week prior to that. So these teachers, provided training during that time, and then they provided ongoing training throughout the year, as well as mentoring and support, right? So what we were trying to build was a network within the school that could help each other as they were progressing through the different goals of implementation. And like I said, we started early with those started simple with those expectations. We went in saying, look, we don't expect you to do everything digitally. First thing we want you to do is be able to assign your work in Google Classroom, even if it's not digital content, even if you're saying you have a worksheet. That way it ends up on the student's calendar. Make sure you're there. The next quarter we had so forth. So those trainers or the technology leaders were classroom teachers. So they weren't, it wasn't like they had all day to go around and do that. But what they did is in PLC time and during their, during planning time and stuff, they would meet with them. They would do training typically before school because it was middle school. We start, 9:30 at some of the schools. So they would do some like before school sessions with the teachers. And then, of course, they kind of became the person that the teachers would ask questions to. Then, they handled what we would call the functional role, which is, helping them learn to use the tools in the new instructional model with the support of our curriculum department. And then our tech support people in the schools would also be there as a resource to address, some of the mechanics if necessary. How do you do X? Where the instructional person would be, why do you do X? The technical person would be, how do you do X, if that makes sense. So that implementation, now as we went into elementary school, that implementation was a smaller number of trainers. It was 2 instead of 4. And that was, a lot of theirs was centered around, all right, what's the right balance between paper and writing and digital? Because at elementary, the reason we didn't do a one-to-one is we had a lot of concerns about, forcing too much of the digital ecosystem on the students when we have research that says that, your retention is greater if you handwrite certain things, if you, and we didn't force out all the paper. So that model and the training changed based upon the level, the focus of those people, where at middle and high, it was mostly about the transition and new instructional model. At elementary, it was a blended instructional model where we were still using a lot of paper and still using the digital assets. So so each one of those training plans looked a little different.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And from a instructional side, from a funding side, from a political and technical side, were there any challenges that you ran into as you went through this process?
Yeah, well, the first challenge is buy-in internally, right? We are extremely fortunate in that you often hear people say, well, the curriculum side does X and the IT side does Y. And you'll notice that they often say that as there are 2 different sides, meaning they're kind of opponents. We're very fortunate in our district that we work very, very closely with our curriculum department. In fact, there are some weeks where the person in charge of instructional integration and curriculum spends more time over here than he does in his own office. And so it was easier for us to get support in some ways because we were unified. So that's the first challenge, right? You know, everyone has to be on board with this because at the district level, you know that there are going to be some political headaches, things like that. Then you get to the next phase, which is we need the principal buy-in because the leader in the building, if they don't model what we're doing, then the teachers are not going to feel like taking it seriously. So then you get to when the stuff starts to be, you start to talk about it in public. And of course, we had challenges on both the hardware and software side. You know, one was, you know, hey, the students don't all have internet at home. How are we going to handle this?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we had to make sure that a lot of our content could be downloaded for offline use. And so when we were negotiating, that was part of how we dealt with some of our content providers. There was the misconception that Chromebooks can't do anything offline, which actually is completely untrue. You could do the majority of things you could do on any other platform offline, work on documents, you know, all that stuff. You can download the videos that they're working with. So we had to tackle that hurdle. We had the Google is stealing our soul mentality, right? Oh my God, you're getting in bed with a company whose job is advertising, and then getting people past what the difference is between a consumer Google account and the SLAs and the privacy agreements in Google Apps for Education, which was a very different animal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So got through those, and then of course on the hardware side, the parents, you know, we want the students to be responsible for the devices. So when you go to a one-to-one where people take the devices home, that introduces a whole lot of other things. Parents not wanting to, you know, saying I don't want to be responsible for it, not realize that the total number of textbooks the kids were before more than the thing. So a lot of internal stuff around logistics and around inventory management. So, you know, at a school level, now we just drop these 2,000 Chromebooks on you, and you've got to track them. So, you know, what we did to tackle that issue is we integrated it directly into our media center system, so they checked it out just like they had textbooks and library books. You know, so those kinds of challenges came up because, you know, obviously people were, you know, just nervous about what was going to happen. At the beginning of this, people thought, oh, the kids are just going to steal them and break them. And even though you obviously have some of that, the majority of students did a good job taking care of them. And in reality, the number of parents they were anticipating marching into the office actually was not that high. We did have a little bit of activity at the board table with people coming and saying, you know, we disagree with using digital altogether, or that we don't like working with companies that are, you know, tracking students. So we had to do some education with our board, and we, you know, got their agreement not to react to any of that stuff. And so if they get a question, let us answer the question.
Mm-hmm.
And Google provided some support in that respect too, because they have a metric ton of information on their privacy policies, their participation in the National Privacy Pledge, and all of their certifications, which, you know, if you look at their certifications and the privacy restrictions required in order to achieve those certifications, they're actually pretty impressive, but it's very different than a consumer Google account. So we had to deal with that, you know, with that perception issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something we hear of commonly, and a lot of the time, it just takes education of the board and of the community to understand that you know, Google's stance on the issue.
The other challenge, and Jerry can speak to this better than I can, is I think that in elementary we underestimated the issue of the young students logging in. And so Jerry, you know, not only managed the Cloud Ready implementation, but he also manages the single sign-on solution. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have any, you know, notes on that.
Well, you know, the two work hand in hand. There's not really any caveats from a Cloud Ready's perspective in order to get ready for Launchpad single sign-on. As either for Cloud Ready.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean it's actually been, we have to deal with update issues every once in a while because we have to update a version of the software when the state's not ready, or those kinds of things. But really, I mean, the implementation has gone remarkably well. And from a support standpoint, we've got this process down now. We are not seeing that huge support demand that we were anticipating when we were thinking we were going to deploy Windows laptops.
Mm-hmm. And so, I guess reflecting back on what that was, what that's been like, and where you're at today, what's the current state of technology in the district, and what have, I guess, final reactions kind of been as of today from students, teachers, staff, parents, the board, the taxpayers, et cetera?
Everyone.
Yeah. I mean, have there still been dissenting voices? Have there, are there still challenges left?
It's funny because knowing that you're going to go in and get hit with a few of these things, you're expecting this to last for a while. But actually, no, they came in spurts. So our current state of technology, I mean, if you want to talk about the conversion, if we look at, right now we're sitting on, between staff and student computers, teacher workstations, everything, we are sitting on, roughly 118,000 machines, and 70-something thousand of those are Chromebooks. And then we also have, you probably know better than I, how many cloud-ready machines we have. So if you look at that shift in just a short number of years, we are easily, 75, 80,000 Chromebooks, right? Chrome devices between Chromebooks and Cloud Ready right now. That was implemented in a 3-year time span, that conversion. So we think we did a really good job. We learned a lot of things along the way, and we made mistakes, but we ended up learning from others that have gone through one-to-one implementations before, and trying to tackle some of the mistakes before they happen. But right now, if you look at it, we've got middle and high schoolers have been in a one-to-one implementation. They're middle school's finishing their 3rd year, high school's finishing their 2nd year. Our teachers, we initially got pushback from teachers on, we need to use Microsoft Office. And we said, all right, well, we're just going to push through this. And then we surveyed them, and our results were 97% said that they thought the transition was easy and they didn't lose any functionality. So, we prepared for that each time, and we have a spike at the beginning of the school year of implementation. So we had a spike at the beginning of our middle school parents, teachers, and community members. Then we had a spike at high school, not so much at elementary. But and that spike of people pushing back and that kind of stuff really lasted approximately 6 weeks, and after that we get it every once in a while. We may get once a quarter somebody comes to the board and says and typically it's not even about platform or anything like that. It's about the fact that that they believe that we should be paper-based instead of digital. And every once in a while we get the fun ones. We had one that thought that we were, tracking what parents are doing in their homes through the Chromebooks we sent home. So, and there's just, not too much you can do to explain that. And so, our board has gotten really good. We have briefed them on the security thing, that we're not, looking at webcams at kids' homes, and we're not, but every once in a while people will think that, we get that a little bit. But if every year, it's not bad.
Yeah. Got it. And so, I guess to cap things off before our Q&A, and opening up for questions, I guess if you had to leave everyone with 3 tips, what would they be?
I think Jerry had some tips about, from the Cloud Ready implementation and that. And I think that if I were to leave you with anything, it is that you're going to see a massive change in how you spend your support time, and how your staff spends their time when you move to a Chrome implementation. It's amazing how we spend so much less time on application issues, OS issues, hardware issues, because it's pretty simple. If the hardware, if something's acting funny, reset the device. And if that doesn't fix it, it's probably a hardware issue. So that was mine, and I know Jerry had a couple to jump in here.
Well, the number one thing is predicated on what Dwayne had just said. As a quick run-to for issue resolvement, we simply re-image the device when and wherever possible.
Mm-hmm.
If the re-image process doesn't take care of the issue at hand, then as Dwayne indicated, it's more than likely some other deep-seated element.
So you find the re-imaging process knocks out like a high percentage of issues?
Well, resetting a Chromebook or just re-imaging or, reinstalling from a flash drive for the cloud ready, I would say that, 90-something% of the issues get fixed by that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, it's quick. It's not like the Windows world where you're sitting there for an hour and a half waiting for all of your apps to be deployed. So we found that, that helps. And we have what we call a same period SLA. So
Mm-hmm.
we stock tools with spares. And so when somebody has a machine that has issues, they just go to the media center and swap it out. And the media person, if resetting it didn't work, the media person's just going to give them a new one. They go on with their day. But the beautiful part is, unlike our Windows environment, and even today with our Windows machines, when you log in, you've got, with the Chrome environment, you log in, you've got your apps and data available to you in a minute. It's, just a different world. Students don't have to sit and wait for their machine, their profiles to build and all that stuff. They're ready to go back to class and continue doing work.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Add whatever process that you do utilize to generate the image onto the device, you'd want to customize that or streamline that as much as possible. So we came from an Altiris land, and we're currently in the middle of transition to go from that to System Center and Configuration Manager by Microsoft. So we had implementations of Cloud Ready in both constructs. And however it is configured for the real world or real world scenarios, no two installations are exactly the same. And it was a challenge, if you will, to get that type of operating system to behave like other operating systems such as Windows in an imaging platform such as Altiris and SCCM. But we got there. That's currently what we're doing. Second tip is as far as your infrastructure is concerned, with Flash, all the different extensions, plugins, whatnot, and everything that makes Cloud Ready function as a Chromebook device in our Google infrastructure, you want to make sure that you have the latest and greatest image that's being released by you guys, Neverware.
Mm-hmm.
In correspondence with the plugins and the extensions and everything, it seems to make those function better. We have noticed in the past that the Cloud Ready machines that are maybe even one or two versions behind the rest of the real world, with a simple update, basically changes everything and makes them function properly. And then that adds to my last tip, which is to ensure that your plugins are globally enabled if you use them through your My Neverware portal.
Yeah, definitely a key one because sometimes people forget to enable their plugins. You want to make sure testing apps that rely on Flash and audio or video that streams has codec, proprietary media components enabled, this kind of thing. Keep everything flowing smoothly. Do you, Jerry? I'm wondering, as far as the regular Chromebook deployment, do you have a tip from there as well for the audience?
My exposure with the regular Chromebook side isn't nearly as grand as some of the other members on our team. I have more exposure with the Cloud Ready side of things, i.e. the operation of a Windows computer, if you will, using a Cloud Ready or Chrome OS, so to speak. So the caveats are kind of different there for me.
Sure.
We do notice that some of the similar issues that we have from a Chrome OS or a Chromebook perspective seem to follow in line with the Cloud Ready. And I don't negate that in any way because in theory, cloud ready is supposed to operate exactly like a Chromebook.
Mm-hmm.
Do notice those little nuances do follow from the Chromebook perspective into the cloud ready platform. And it's either simply handled by a version update or an extension update or something along those lines. So in other words, layman's terms, what fixes one 90% of the time or better fixes the other.
Yeah, and we really, in practice in the schools, don't have to manage them separately. Here we obviously have both consoles, but at the school level, for them, we tried to make it super easy. You want to convert a machine, just go into the same imaging software you use right now, use Cloud Ready instead of Windows, and it would, we wanted to make it as streamlined as possible for the tech people to adapt to the new environment using procedures they already knew. And once you get that down, once you get your image down for Cloud Ready, keep it updated, but it just kind of smooths everything out. We don't really have a lot of OS issues.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, appreciate you guys leaving those tips for folks. And if it's all right, we'll transition into some of the Q&A. We've got quite a few questions here. So first question was, are you still a mixed environment with Google and Chrome OS devices and Windows? Are teachers and admin staff still using Windows devices and apps?
Great question. So yes, our teacher and admin staff are Windows and our students are Chrome. There are some student Windows computers in our high schools and middle schools for our career and tech ed labs. For example, if we're doing, like digital design, AutoCAD, 3D rendering, those kinds of things, we're still using Windows. And staff are on Windows as well.
Mm-hmm. And then here's one that we hear pretty often. The largest challenge this district has is with printing, both of report cards, assessments, letters, purchase orders, etc., using Chromebooks within their G Suite platform. How have you guys dealt with that?
With the student devices, we don't anymore, but we're using Windows with the staff devices, so they're still printing the way they always have. With the Chromebooks, it's not that we stop them from printing, but we discourage them from printing. And of course, printing is probably the weakest part of the Google ecosystem. And you can make them now print with local network printers instead of having to use Google Cloud Print and things like that. But even when those capabilities came out, we just kind of said, hey, have the students turn in their content digitally. And we had screaming and crying for about 2 weeks. And beyond that, we have only had one school that is still not accepting that. And that's only for one class in that school. So,
yeah.
We've I guess as a side benefit, we've reduced our printing dramatically.
Yeah, I think part of the fact that the textbook to digital transition fueled your adoption of Chromebooks probably also, right? People were wanting to get rid of these textbooks and wanting to probably trim down the amount of paper they were using and stuff they were printing.
Right.
Yeah. We also see a lot of schools, if they can't do Google Cloud Print because of the age of their printers, set up just a Windows print server. I think you alluded to that, and just kind of route their jobs through there.
Yeah, you can install on a Windows print server. There's a service that Google has to convert it to Cloud Print, but now you can also just point it at a printer, on the network. You can point it at a local address now.
Mm-hmm.
That brings us to the end of our questions.
A wrap on questions.
Yeah.
And
we're right at the top of the hour anyway.
Wanted to thank you guys for joining us. Dwayne, Jerry, really helpful to hear about what you guys are doing. And I think a lot of other districts in Florida and around the country are going to appreciate some of the lessons learned.
Thank you very much, guys.
All right, well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Likewise, you're welcome anytime.
So for attendees, we'll be following up with an email containing the link to the recording and the slides within the next day or so. Thank you, everybody, for joining.